Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Ray. I'm a resident of the town of Essex, and I will be trying to speak to everyone today about the potential for an AI data center to come to your area. I'd like to start by saying I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, and I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice, if you get any ideas. On screen, you should see now the place where you can go to get to the section that you actually want to listen to. If you want the shortest what has to happen and don't care about how we got to that point, that would be the TLDR summary section at the end. Jump right to the very end. I'm going to try and do this as a more podcast style, trying to be mildly entertaining, but again, the point of this is education. One of my degrees is as a teacher for math and physics, and my other degree is in engineering, systems design engineering, which is kind of a generalized engineering that's a mixture of electrical, mechanical, and computer engineering. With this, I did a lot more controls engineering myself, which requires hardware, software. I've worked in power generation, oil and gas, done sound frequency analysis for several companies, and I do my own software editing, and I work with AI myself. I'm kind of considered a tech person myself. A lot of people in the town do come to me for help with that sort of stuff. I actually used AI to create a majority of this presentation. What you see is actually a summary from an LLM. I specifically used Google Gemini's Flash, and I used just Google search. Using those, it runs through all kinds of different places where you can get your information from, including Bloomberg, CBC, CTV, CNN, Fox. I also use the Town of Essex website, which it also uses as well, and the Town of London, a bunch of provincial websites, the actual Energy Board, Globe and Mail, etc., etc. You get the idea. This stuff will come from anywhere, and the idea to doing this is to remove as much bias as possible. It's interesting because I consider myself left of center, and majority of the people who have tried to contact me have actually been right of center. So it is interesting to see that this is not a partisan issue. Everyone is concerned about this for various reasons, and I'm here to try to tell you there are some, but there are ways to address this and work with these people, but you have to be proactive in order to do it. It will be difficult, but it is something that is attainable if we follow some very simple steps. Basically, I'm about to tell you what AI wants you to know about AI and AI data centers. As curated by an engineer, I specifically have never worked in an AI facility or ever been to one. So again, what I'm going off of is the publicly available information. I have no private or special information that wouldn't be available to anybody else. What I do have is a very specific viewpoint on what we can do to protect ourselves legally. Again, not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but based on things that are happening presently, I'm very concerned about this for my own personal financial reasons, as well as some of the environmental impacts that could potentially befall me. Thankfully, in the area I live in, there are specific things that actually help our scenario. So I will be getting into this throughout the presentation. We try to be as succinct as possible, and hopefully a lot of this will help. So thanks, everyone. This is a warning created by myself for the town of Essex. What I'm going to be trying to go through in this presentation is what AI data centers are for, how they're different from other places and other computer infrastructure. I'll touch on that. There's different types of AI, and within that there's subsets of subsets. So there's several different components that make up an AI and how it could potentially be cooled. And that's the majority of where the differentials between them lie. We're going into the risks specifically to our community, as well as things that your community, even if you don't live in the town of Essex, could be doing, even if you have nothing imminent in your area. The I'll be going over the current legal landscape and some case studies on how this has come up, and essentially the paths that AI companies have taken in order to get what they need from each individual township. I'm also going to go through some of what the province has done and is doing and what they are not doing, and where municipalities are left to pick up the pieces. The hope is that this is a starting point for the townships in the area to start looking into this, and then any township anywhere really. So a lot of this information won't directly apply to the town of Essex. It may have applied to your place. It could be in Canada, it could be in US. A majority of the information is mixed between the two. We will get through it as we get through it. I'll try to be as specific as I can as I go through for that. And then finally, there are steps we can take and what will happen if we don't, and that falls in with the case studies. First I'll start off with talking about what AI is and what specifically the types of AI I'm talking about. So your average computer, the one I'm working on right now, is around 500 watts. That's the size of the power supply. If you have an enterprise grade server, so one of those really big ones, you're getting about double for that. So when you see those racks of computers, there's 4,000 or so watts there. A cloud server, which is slightly more complicated, but for the most part is more for storage and communications, is doing about 1,500 watts. Each AI hyperscaler GPU rack, which is the core component of this, will use a minimum of 40,000 watts, up to 100,000 watts or more for a single rack. The more heat you have, therefore you require more cooling, otherwise those components melt. Higher the energy, higher the heat, the more cooling that is required. So broadly, the way you can split the AI cooling is between air cooling and water cooling. So in order to help limit water usage, you can move towards air cooling. The advantages are that, again, you limit water, but the disadvantages, you have insufficient electrical it's very inefficient, essentially, and requires additional energy. Then I think it's about 25 to 30% specifically than if you were to use water cooling. So it requires more energy in general, and it typically are noisier because there are more fans involved and due to the inefficiencies. Water cooling has helped reduce some of that electrical usage, but there's a trade-off when you have water usage. There's issues with attaining it potentially, or what companies are doing are changing out the water for other things like hydrocarbons, which can be explosive, or things that can be incredibly toxic. So a lot of the major risks come down to the types of cooling tech that you're going to use. So again, with air cooling, the number one concerns are the high energy, so the electrical supply, and in a lot of cases, noise, more so than some of the others. In the case of water cooling, there are several ways in which that can be done directly to the chip or through what is called two-stage cooling. Each one of those provides a benefit, an advantage, and a disadvantage for everybody. The other key term that you'll hear used is closed loop versus open loop. So the difference between a closed loop and an open loop: in a closed loop system, all the cooling is maintained and does not get rejected into the air. In an open loop, those are the ones that are using more water, so have a larger impact on the local water supply because they are rejecting that heat directly into the atmosphere, as opposed to using various air cooling methods to help dissipate some of that. When there is water being used, it can be used both in the closed and open loop system. Sometimes it's water, and sometimes it's a mixture of water and glycol, something similar to what you're going to have in your regular engine. There are natural hydrocarbons that have been used and can be utilized for this, including pneumonia and I believe it's propylene. these actually have a certain effect where they can potentially be explosive or cause fire. That's one of the major drawbacks with using those natural hydrocarbons. Synthetic hydrocarbons could also be used in the system. It varies the effect of how those synthetic hydrocarbons or synthetic molecules as well are used. So it's going to depend wildly on what specifically is used. One specific very potent chemical is when you use fluorinated gases. Those actually can degrade down to TFA and generate what are called PFAs, or people know them as forever chemicals. They cause issues with cancer, infertility, etc., etc. So depending on how you're planning on cooling it, there are a wide range of these things, but each one can, for the most part, be slightly mitigated in several ways. Specifically, ones we need to look at that will affect everything are noise, heat, and air pollution. Again, the air pollution is another one that is specific on some of the external details that aren't related to cooling, but are important to understand as part of what the risks are to a town. I will go try and explain specifically now each one of these individual pieces in order to show you how each one potentially could be a strain on your local water supply. Directly received this, I believe this was from Facebook, where I believe the mayor was saying our development services department has not been approached from any type of data center deployment in the town of Essex. We suspect it's because these projects require immense amounts of electricity and water for powering and cooling, and the town doesn't have the capacity to support that. What I'm going to try and explain now is that there are a couple problems with this statement. First is that the approach is to wait until somebody approaches you. This is leaves you in a weaker position to negotiate from. And the suspecting it's the electricity and water issues in the area is probably actually not correct. And I'll get into specifically what it is that they're after and why it's unlikely the town of Essex will actually have one. And more than likely it will go into another location. I can get into that at the end. I'm going to try and stay specific on what's happening here. So over 40% of the upcoming U.S. data centers are in areas already facing low electrical capacity or bottlenecks. Quite frankly, they don't care what your system looks like now. They will even potentially do their own things in order to get it to happen. And unfortunately, they will make modifications and do different things. So thinking that they won't actually come here because of that is probably false thinking. Good example is Quebec and British Columbia that now have extreme amount of data centers. It has dropped so low in their areas that they've had to put the strict lien on them or completely almost abolish them in the case of British Columbia when they only actually have a few for their province. They started out having decent enough electricity, and they had no problem running them right into the ground before they were able to stop them. So again, they're going to take as much rope as you can give them, I believe. I can show you specific examples where that has happened. Additionally, when we talk about the local electrical supply, there's also an issue with the water supply in a lot of cases. And sometimes it's actually both. And so there are actually roughly 64% of the regions have either they do have low electrical capacity and combined with severe water shortages. So in more cases than not, they are going into places that aren't suited for them. Specifically, a lot of those end up in the U.S. and the southern U.S. presently, and they're actually in a lot of problems down there because of it. They're being placed in places where there are presently droughts. So again, regardless of your current supply or water supply, they're going to look to put these things wherever they can get them. And there has to be a few different things that happen for that to be advantageous for them. And so again, we have to look at different ways that this can be approached so that we do the right thing. So again, Bloomberg News has found that 2/3 of the new data centers are being built in places already gripped by high levels of water stress. So to put a fine enough point on it, they don't really care whether your capacity is set for it or not. They will work their way around that. Only the data shows this. Only 20% to 40% of all water usage at the AI facility is directly tied in for cooling. And a majority of it actually comes from the power generation that is required to facilitate this level of electricity being used. So while we can talk about specifically how much that water supply will go up, there will be additional demand elsewhere for this type of usage. The reason that there is such a large discrepancy between those numbers and why it could be any number of things is more than 50% of all data centers don't even track their water usage. That's why we have such wide estimates, because we just don't actually know. The reason they don't do that is they don't want you to know what the actual answer is. It's easier to hide something that doesn't exist. Blow down discharge is another key problem, and this isn't water, it's what happens when the water comes back. So when the water comes back, it's extremely toxic. If your town has not set up their bylaws in such a way that they have adequate blockage for this, so some legal way of preventing them from doing this, you're going to get highly concentrated things. This actually is very damaging and awful for the equipment, and in some cases it can leak out, and those environmental issues can cause greater levels of issues. Evaporative cooling, consuming 70% of the water withdrawn. In our case, we actually have a ton of water here in town of Essex. We have access to the Great Lakes, which is 20% of the freshwater water supply. So it wouldn't be surprising that an AI company would also want access to that as well. Evaporated cooling is not as much of an issue for us because we have a very large reserve. In some places that don't, that's where that would be an issue. So it not returning to the supply actually depletes the reservoir. In our case, our reservoir is so large, it'd take 1 million years for a standard average AI hyperscaler to become an issue for us. So me personally, this, again, doesn't really apply to us, but it might apply to someone else. The average resident returns 90% of the water they use back to the system, where a majority is lost in these evaporative cooling systems. So that's where these losses can go to other locations, and there can then be a lack of groundwater. And again, for our case, groundwater is less of an issue, but we could talk, that's neither here nor there. Localized explosion of fire, I touched on this when we talked about the natural hydrocarbons and some of the synthetics. As you can see, there are locations where there's an extreme amount of heat there, and things go wrong, and things don't work very well all the time. And as you can see, Ohio has had that issue with 84 emergency calls to 2 AI data centers over a 4-year period. So again, when you use those types of fuels and things like that, these are the types of risks potential in your area. And so it should also be noted that we're looking at what additional services are going to be required for these other things, like an expanded fire force. I touched on earlier that a lot of there is the F gases, which can leak in and during routine maintenance, and as they degrade in the atmosphere and locally, it will accumulate, and you'll actually end up distributing it with rainfall, and so we actually get a lot of these forever chemicals spread throughout our area. The fire suppression systems can also contain these chemicals, so it's important that you have something to deter this in your area. Chillers and rooftop exhaust fans are a major issue for noise in the area. Almost every single one will have them. There isn't one that's not directly rejecting some amount of heat into the atmosphere directly. A lot of those can be extremely loud, and can be like having a lawnmower consistently running outside your house all day, every day. And during emergencies, there are a significant number of these that have massive diesel and gas-powered turbines. When those kick in, it can sound like there's a jackhammer outside your door every single day. There are ways in which certain regulations have been skirted. One of those is that extremely long wavelengths aren't necessarily picked up by certain devices that are recording decibel readings, because those low frequency hums, which are under 100 hertz, typically around 50 hertz, are not actually always heard. They're actually felt. So think about when you hear a bass guitar or a bass drum at a rock concert and you're feeling that. Some of those will not actually be picked up. So there are scenarios where even if you have a bylaw that says there's a 55 dB limit, it's important to know which style and how you're doing that, and whether it's the mimicking of the human ear or whether it by filtering out the lowest and highest frequencies. As a engineer, I worked into doing sound and frequency analysis, doing brake noise on vehicles. One of the tricks that is used is if you can't get rid of something, you can push it up to a high enough frequency, people can't hear it. So the vibration will still exist, it just isn't noticed. So it's this type of, this is typically that happens on the high end with that style of thing. This is the exact opposite, where they can push things far enough to the low end at low enough frequencies that they can actually comply with the regulations while still having issues. The major problem with this is that if your walls are vibrating, you can usually have a lot of trouble sleeping, and that can cause all kinds of other health effects for the neighboring region. Specifically to the town of Essex, we need to directly look at 2422, Section 50. Just a slight concern there that if the AI dentists were ever given essential utility status, that would provide them a lot more runway. Again, not a lawyer, but I would like that specifically looked at personally. Heat is actually another major issue from all of these. I tried to find what was the average sort of temperature changes for around the area and altering, how it might affect climates. These are the averages and extremes that I was able to pull. When I say I mean the AI came up with these as what it is doing. Specifically, you'll see that there is an average rise of 3.6 really in that specific area. And then when you start getting into the neighboring towns, you can see it very widely. The amount of heat that's rejected obviously changes with different technologies. Another key issue with a lot of these things is air pollution. It's related to actually the power being generated for these. A lot of times they have giant mobile diesel generators in order to be used sparingly when there are issues with power, in order to augment the power usage required. Generally, these will produce a lot of nitrogen oxides as well as fine particulate matter, which, again, as most people know, will cause a issue with pollution spiking in the surrounding towns. Speaking to this specifically, I believe we have a pretty good setup with the town of Essex right now that won't allow this, but I am not 100% certain. You should determine whether your community has sufficient wording to limit these things, regardless of the type of cooling tech that is used. It's important to also dictate the type of backup energy and standard energy generation that they want to put in your area. So at this point, we kind of have a good idea of what all the negative impacts potentially could be to your area and what's going and what can happen with them. Each area is going to be very widely different on what can be done. For our area specifically, there is a water reserve capacity that we can point to in order to slow everything down, but likely any AI hyperscaler would create the infrastructure and remove this roadblock if we ever tried to stop them. And again, The other move is to move to a high energy system, which at that point, typically only the province and the Ontario Energy Board will have any ability to restrict in any way. So if you would not like that to happen, that would be another regulation for your local community in order to limit going to high energy systems in order to remove the reserve water capacity type issues. The other key thing is that we can only indirectly limit energy currently via some of our site plan controls. I personally have not been able to get through those. I haven't had the time to do that, but that would be something that any community should be also looking to in order to make them pay for anything that they're going to require. And ideally, you would also have them have all that done prior to anything happening with any approvals. So we'll get into a specific mechanism for that very shortly. Site-specific agreements will allow us to negotiate details. At this point, though, we're at a very far end, and there's a lot of approvals that have already been passed at this point. So at this point is when most places will be opened up to being sued if we start getting restrictive with their policies. So if you ever do get sued, the community is going to fold. These guys typically, so again, hyperscalers are the ones making the largest facilities. These are the people with the most money. They have the most resources in order to win a legal battle. Unfortunately, that is typically how it works. Specifically, any community, any local government is not going to want that financial burden upon them to even attempt this. So typically at this point, there will be a fold and a resolution. But at this, you have a significantly less leverage at this point, especially if it becomes an actual legal battle. So far, the current legal strategies that a lot of places have implemented, they're broadly split into two separate categories. Each individual location and county, community, etc., will have something slightly different, but they're all fairly similar. Being proactive, I'll show is the best use of what we can do. This will actually limit the amount of possibility that you are sued, and if you are sued, it will increase your odds of winning by 4 to 1. That's considered what would be a successful outcome as opposed to a full-out win as a court decision, is what I attempted to get that number out of AI. The very first strategy any location should do is pass a temporary moratorium. This can either be by some kind of control bylaw or temporary zoning pause. This gives your community time to say, hey, this is how we want to move forward, so we can actually figure out what the framework is. If you do not have this, I will be demonstrating what happens to communities that have not done this. Being proactive with our bylaws is going to be the best thing we can do. The best control we have is actually land use and our zoning. So we need to specifically say that these are AI data centers, and this is where it's allowed to go. We have to avoid being vague with the categories. We have to be ultra specific, saying data centers or community or computer-based things, and create special zoning for these. If this is a new technology and it's not necessarily already in your bylaws. A good example for being proactive with the zoning bylaws is for us is presently the bylaw 1073. There are a couple issues that I have with that presently. It's very hard to bin that data center into any specific zoning. They could potentially argue that it's a full-scale utility and use a commercial location and consider themselves a communication system. There is also language that says industrial uses include communications, and if you actually go through the uses or in the definition for light use industrial, you'll find that actually it's not explicitly called out that it's not. So in theory, they could consider themselves light industrial, even though they're probably the most heavily industrialized thing that could possibly exist. Specifically, processing, you could try and bin them under that, but again, it will still be the same thing. It doesn't quite fit, and having communications fall under two broad categories is a great way to have your zoning bylaws ripped to shreds in any legal setting. So presently, I'm not personally able to do this. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but it would be very important for you to do this prior to any application and any legal action against you. You will have a considerably better chance of winning if you have done that. There are other key things that you can do, which is update the site control plan bylaws, and you have to do it preemptively. If you're not, again, you can reset open to be sued. Some of the key ones and key things to look at are soundproofing and soundproofing requirements, specifically the thing I said about lower frequencies, the backup generator emissions, and then controlling of what types of electrical could be used in that facility would also greatly impact any emissions-based things. And again, they are setbacks I would be concerned with, considering the volume of hum that comes out of these things. It would behoove us to actually look through that in extreme detail. And when I say we, that's any township. Another key thing that has been negotiated in other legal situations is a life cycle type result. Essentially, with the technology, it usually swaps out every about 4 years on average because of the speed these processors are continuing to have to push. But usually, on average, that's about how long that technology lasts. So the specific laws governing it will need to expand and can grow as we grow with it. So having an agreement with them to do something along these lines will help prevent us from cleaning things up a lot later. In addition to this, there is another strategy that places have put in bills in which require anybody who's purchasing land to disclose whether that is for software or processing intentions, and whether there are any grid agreements already in place 90 days before the land is actually purchased. This gives everybody a chance to go in and be able to have their say and have a little bit of runway in order to organize and help create a legal defense. So these are the things that can be done today prior to any application coming in. These are the things that any community that is concerned about how their community will be affected by this will need to look into in order to move forward with a positive resolution that you are looking for. There are other reactive strategies once there is an application in process. A lot of the things are to use conditional use permits where you're not allowing data centers by right, but you have to require them to do extra type environmental assessments and and enhance your noise reductions and things of these natures in order to ensure that things are actually being taken care of. Again, I've looked at our stuff, and it generally has been pretty good in that manner of what we have available to us. Mandating water meters and conservation is going to be a key issue. This one specifically, again, I don't personally believe it fits with us because of our large volume of water, but being specific about the types of things that can be used in cooling. So the closed loop might not necessarily be the biggest thing for us, but not having F-gases and potential PFASs, that's what we're trying to keep out of our area. So being able to have something in there to dictate that and require them to provide that information, I don't believe is currently in any of the standardized reporting. Again, I may get stuff wrong here. Everyone feel free to correct me. One of the things that is quite an interesting piece is how the heat is rejected. If you have policies in place and agreements in place, you could redirect that heat and use it for heating any municipal buildings. thereby benefiting us. Now, having said all that and what we can do now, there are certain things we can't control. When I say we, as at a township or a county level, there are a majority of where these decisions are going to lie and what is going to be imposed on you is actually going to be coming from the province. The tech companies want that single person on their side, and if they are positive for that tech company in your area, you're going to have a lot harder time fighting this than vice versa. So understanding where your area, your actual state or province sits is actually incredibly important, and making sure that there are other things, whether I've said them or not, that are presently being missed. So a good example is currently there's an Ontario law which mandates standardized public reporting, but it presently excludes the power usage effectiveness. So how effective your power, we're sending them a ton of power. We want to know how much is actually being used for that and how much is being wasted as heat. It's an important thing to understand whether they're using our resources effectively. And water consumption. Typically across all places, this is not mandated. Municipalities have to get them to report this. Otherwise, they technically don't have to from the government's, from the provincial perspective. One of the main issues that has come up so far is exclusionary zoning claims. So what happens is if your province or state wants you to have an AI data center in your area, and you put a total ban on, they can then sue and go up to that court to say you're excluding their zoning specifically. And the place where this happened is Saline Township in Michigan. So about a year ago, I believe, there was a $16 billion AI data center that was going to go in Michigan. Their board put in a memorandum to block it. They couldn't stop it because they filed a lawsuit, and basically they just didn't have a very good zoning setup for this. And so I believe this particular lawsuit was for $80 million. Once they filed the lawsuit, they basically said, we can't fight this. We don't have the money, the time, effort to do this, so we cannot. So at that point, they were able to put in this extreme mega facility. Another similar type incident happened in Hill County, Texas. They did the 1-year memorandum, and then at that point still got hit with a lawsuit, at which point they had to repeal. So the point is, even if you do these things, you're still potentially going to have to fight. They will try and sue you. This one particularly was for $100 million. Most politicians don't want to have that risk over their head of losing that federal. So this one was a federal lawsuit. So again, you have to have a higher understanding of where your specific country is at and whether they're going to back you in these types of scenarios. Ultimately, what happened is that they repealed the ban, and they went to an idea that they needed to publicly disclose water usage, power demands, et cetera, et cetera. So they were able to negotiate some details, but not to the level of what I would hope we would look to do in our areas. Having said all this and all the different places that have been sued and had different issues, we basically have two paths forward. We can act preemptively, or we can not do anything, right? We can wait until there is an application. We have no control whether an AI data center is going to try and come into our communities, whoever's community this is. That decision is theirs, and that is not ours. So all we can do is control what we can do, which is either act now or wait. So if we act now, we actually have regulations that we know are going to protect us because we've gone through and done our due diligence. And 80% of the potential win rate if we ever try to get sued, because courts typically favor when you have codified your laws and thought about this in advance, and it shows that you've gone through the process to say this is or not what we want. If our location chooses to do an outright ban, this would be our one and only way in which we can do this. If there's one actually active and we try then to implement policies and make changes, this is when we will run the risk of losing more of the legal battles that could potentially befall us. The average AI company wants to make money and aren't particularly cared on how they're going to do that, right? So if we want to control how they're going to do it, the best thing to do is do it proactively. Let's say AI never comes, we make all these changes. So we made the changes. It took a little bit of time and effort to do this, but we are protected in the event anything happens. If AI never comes and we don't do anything, it all sort of works out. So I don't like the risk of not doing it because, again, we should be trying to control the things we can control, and these are the ways in which many companies have gone through this process. Specifically, I'd like to try and put this stuff a little bit more in perspective. I've thrown a lot of numbers out. So currently the largest load on our entire of all of Essex County is 300 milliwatt hours, and that's the entirety of the agricultural greenhouses in all of the county of Essex. So Leamington, Kingsville, etc. I believe it excludes Windsor. Individual AI facilities generally run between 100 and 500 megawatts, but they can be large as 2 gigawatts. So one AI data center is basically equivalent to all of the entirety of the greenhouse commercial district. Just want that to sink in for a couple seconds. So the size of one of these things is somewhere between 4 to 20 football fields. When you see 1 million square feet, the one flagship one, which we talked about earlier, I believe was 21 million square feet. So you can do the math yourself there. Industrial definitions say that this is more of just a fact that they have to have a minimum of 5,000 servers, but they can have hundreds and tens and hundreds of thousands. So these things vary widely in scale. They can be very small or they can be extremely large. Putting in some kind of protection against the types of, and sizes that we would allow in our area would be quite important. Some of the smaller ones might work in our area and might make sense for us. Now, when I talked about traditional cloud racks previously, we had said they're somewhere around 10 to 15 kilowatts of power. When you get into some of these large-scale hyperscaling GPUs, we're talking 50 to 150 kilowatts per rack, and we're talking 5,000 racks. This is how the number gets into your megawatts and gigawatt territory, and can, again, vary wildly. Once you get into these super large NVIDIA style ones, the amount of heat that is being generated is extreme to the point where they require advanced cooling systems. And you're looking at an order of magnitude more than that. So again, we want to make the distinction between cloud data centers and AI data centers, AI hyperscaling data centers more specifically, in order to limit the sizing that might potentially befall us. There has been talk of a AI data center coming to, I believe it's Windsor. I think they're calling that the Minwaka AI center. That is supposedly estimated for 200 megawatts. So I'm going to use that as my example. Whether it exists, doesn't exist, I don't know. I don't quite care. This is a hypothetical. What if this were to come? So we're going to use that as some basic math in order to compare it against our location here in Essex County and see roughly how much usage we're expecting from something like this. So if we had one of those 200 mega facilities, they're expected to use 4 million liters per day. If we use an estimate for how much water is used per person in Canada and use that as an average, I use that to figure out what our total intake sits per day. Whether this is correct or not, I do not know. But again, it's the best calculation I could come up with in order to generate a result here. So what we're looking at is if this is anywhere in the ballpark of being correct, it's going to be an additional 5% of the municipal supply every single day being used. The biggest problem I see is not that is coming out of our reservoirs. If that were to run the 4 million per day, it would take around, I think it was 100 million years to get rid of Lake Erie. So I am not concerned with the water usage. It will take more pumping. It will have to increase the facility. But if we're smart about it, we can make sure they are paying for that and doing that work. What I am concerned about is if you then have the water returning to the system. So that 4 million, if it all came back into the system, it wouldn't in a lot of cases, but should it, that would be 25% of all of the wastewater available. I came to that number by using AI using the peak usage versus the total capacity estimates from the town. So the major risk I have identified, or I'm very concerned about, is what if it's not 200 watts? What if it changes? What if it's 500? What if it's a gig? What if it's 2 gigs? We don't have anything to say that can't happen, from my understanding. So there goes all of our county's headroom. The good news is that we've actually have a pretty good wastewater bylaw, from my understanding. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but it would be something we'd definitely be very concerned about, more so than the water usage, is the wastewater impact on our town. Commercial greenhouses, just to give you some idea right now, is 55% of all the treated water in our area. So this would actually use a little bit less than that. But the key thing is that it's the amount of energy that is required. So we said 300 megawatts. Well, growers have currently submitted more than 1,300 megawatts of formal requests for new or expanding facilities to the regional grid. So Elk Energy, places in our area. That is, again, more than multiple data centers already potentially coming up through the growers. This is something that should be very concerning if you are within that industry, because some of that capacity that was meant for you could get stolen or taken away. Currently, we just sit around 100 or 1,000 megawatts in entirety of the Windsor-Essex region. We're already looking to go to considerably higher. I believe there's plans in place to get over 2,000 by 2035. However, before then, we are already planned to fall short. We are currently at 1,500 megawatts of capacity space specifically, and that is going to continue to be our shortfall, is not the generating of power, but then getting the power to the locations that need them. So we already we are likely to have a shortfall based on an independent electricity system operator, the IESO, the governing body, saying it's concerned about the capacity already, about the amount of the theoretically proposed data center. The one thing that I haven't really touched on yet is okay, so we already said it's not water, it's not electricity. What are they looking for? Well, one thing is getting things in quick and regulations where they can be able to do what they want, how they want to do it, as best as they can. If it was me as an AI company, that's what I would be looking to do. The major thing they need is actually, and the major issue is latency. So latency is the speed at which everything moves around. These AI data centers are connected and can communicate to each other. So the most important thing for them is to have high quality infrastructure from a internet service availability. So the map you see on the left is from 2019, pulled from Canadian data, but you would expect that it would be very similar, as it's all the major locations where they have people is where you're seeing a large volume of this high quality internet, and it wouldn't be in other locations. So to that end, it's actually fiber optics and how good your internet is that's going to depend on when you're going to have something try and come into your area. And the worse off you are at that, the more likely you will have a smaller facility, an augmented facility, not a large AI superscaler. So while I am concerned that this could happen and things could happen, it's actually, in my opinion, more than unlikely that it would come specifically to the town of Essex. I personally believe that it would be, if I was an AI company looking to do it in this area, I would be looking in the LaSalle, South Windsor, Amherstburg areas. Not to alarm you, not to say that anything's going to happen, but those are the types of locations that just outside of town that will be very easy to tie into that very high grade infrastructure, and it actually brings you to a closer epicenter to Detroit and general population density in that area. So if they were to put one in Ontario instead of over in Michigan, in addition to, that's where I would expect to see it personally. Again, this is based on, if I were them, this is what I would do. So having said all that, this is everything that I've gone through in order to come to my conclusions. As we see, the AI hyperscalers, which are entirely different than a lot of other facilities, they affect both a township and their neighboring townships in many, many ways. Not just water, not just electricity. We're talking about wastewater, fire, hazardous chemicals, sound, noise, heat. There are several ways in which we need to determine the environmental impact. There are some ways that the province is doing it. There are other ways that are not. The best way to get what you're looking for is to be proactive. If you wait, you will more than likely get sued. The person you're getting sued by has hundreds of millions of dollars. You're very unlikely to win in those scenarios. In fact, nobody has. You would have to have the backing of your province or state, and that would be the only way you're going to do it. Considering we have active ones in our province, I would not hold your breath. Personal opinion there. The best legal decisions we can do are going to be proactive. I've gone through a significant number that we can do. Specifically for the town of Essex, what I would like to see is an immediate memorandum or zoning pause. You need to do it as soon as possible before a potential application gets to you. This is the best way to have a chance of success if and when we see an 8-figure lawsuit. There are specific issues with the zoning bylaws. That is specifically how other towns have been sued. It's very important that we address that specifically now and as soon as possible prior to anything ever coming to our town. Lastly, for the town of Essex, I'm hoping the town staff can direct a review to generate a plan, to review the bylaws, to that if and when we ever get a AI hyperscaler application, we have a very specific plan in place in order to do something about this.